The marriage contract was signed in silence, witnessed only by solicitors and the cold autumn rain beating against the windows of Ashford Hall. Lady Georgiana Hartley became the Duchess of Ashford not through love, but through necessity, her family's crumbling estate exchanged for the Duke's need for a respectable heir. For 6 months they lived as strangers under the same roof, their conversations limited to polite formalities at dinner. The Duke of Ashford, Everett Blackwood, was a man carved from ice and duty, his heart seemingly as impenetrable as the stone walls of his ancestral home. But one November night, passing by the music room, he heard something that shattered his carefully constructed indifference, the sound of his wife weeping, whispering a name that was not his own. In that moment, everything he thought he understood about their arrangement and about her began to unravel. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The morning of Lady Georgiana Hartley's wedding dawned grey and cheerless, much like the union itself. She stood before the tall windows of her childhood bedchamber at Hartley Manor, watching the mist roll across the Devonshire hills, knowing this would be the last time she would see them as an unmarried woman. At 22, she possessed the kind of beauty that painters sought to capture: dark auburn hair that caught fire in candlelight, eyes the colour of spring moss, and a delicate frame that belied the strength of character beneath. Yet none of that mattered now. She was a commodity, a solution to her father's gambling debts and her family's impending ruin. "You look like you're attending a funeral, not a wedding," came the gentle voice of her younger sister, Penelope, who entered carrying Georgiana's veil. "Perhaps I am," Georgiana replied softly, turning from the window. "The funeral of every dream I once harbored." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "Georgie, you don't have to do this. We could find another way." "There is no other way." Georgiana's voice was firm, though her hands trembled as she took the veil. "Father has exhausted every option. The creditors will seize Hartley Manor within the month if I don't marry the Duke. Where would you go? Where would Mother go? This is my duty." The Duke of Ashford, Everett Blackwood, was 30 years old and considered one of the most eligible and most intimidating men in England. His wealth was legendary, his estates vast, his lineage impeccable. He was also known for his cold demeanour, his sharp intellect, and his complete disinterest in the frivolous pursuits of society. Rumours whispered that he had loved once in his youth, and that the lady had died, taking his capacity for warmth with her. He needed a wife to produce an heir and manage his households. Love was not part of the equation. Georgiana had met him only twice before the wedding. The first time was at a ball in London, where he had assessed her with the same detached interest one might show a thoroughbred horse at auction. The second was when he came to Hartley Manor to finalize the marriage contract with her father. He had spoken perhaps 20 words to her, all of them perfunctory. "You understand the terms?" he had asked, his grey eyes revealing nothing. "I do, Your Grace. You will be expected to manage Ashford Hall and the London residence. You will attend necessary social functions. Beyond that, I require little from you except discretion and the eventual provision of an heir." Discretion. The word had struck her as particularly cold, as if their marriage would be something shameful to hide rather than celebrate. The wedding ceremony at the village church was attended by precisely 43 people, mostly the Duke's associates and a few of Georgiana's family members. Her father looked relieved, her mother wept quietly, and Penelope clutched her hand until the moment Georgiana had to walk down the aisle. The Duke stood at the altar like a statue, his dark hair perfectly groomed, his tall frame imposing in his formal attire. When she reached him, he did not smile. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging the arrival of an expected parcel. The vows were spoken. The ring, a heavy sapphire that had belonged to his grandmother, was placed on her finger. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the Duke's kiss was brief and perfunctory, his lips barely brushing hers. There was no warmth, no promise, no hope in that kiss, only obligation. The wedding breakfast was an equally somber affair. Georgiana sat beside her new husband at the head table, acutely aware of the vast emotional distance between them despite their physical proximity. He spoke occasionally to the gentleman on his other side, discussing matters of parliament and estate management. He did not speak to her at all. As the afternoon waned, it came time to depart for Ashford Hall. The Duke's carriage was magnificent, black lacquered wood, with the Ashford crest emblazoned in gold on the doors. Georgiana embraced her family one final time, holding Penelope longest. "Write to me," Penelope whispered. "Promise you'll write." "I promise." The journey to Ashford Hall took 4 hours. For the entire duration, the Duke read correspondence, occasionally making notes in a leather journal. Georgiana watched the countryside pass by, each mile taking her further from everything she had known. She wanted to speak, to break the oppressive silence, but what could she possibly say? She was trapped in a carriage with a stranger who was now legally her husband, bound to him for life. When Ashford Hall finally came into view, Georgiana's breath caught despite her melancholy. The estate was magnificent, a sprawling Jacobean manor of honey-coloured stone with countless windows reflecting the dying light of day. Formal gardens stretched in every direction, and beyond them ancient forests darkened the horizon. It was beautiful and imposing in equal measure, much like its master. The household staff assembled in the entrance hall to greet their new mistress. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who assessed Georgiana with barely concealed skepticism. The butler, Hastings, was more diplomatic, bowing deeply and welcoming her with practiced courtesy. There were dozens of others, maids, footmen, cooks, groundskeepers, all watching her with curious eyes. "Mrs. Pemberton will show you to your chambers," the Duke said, his first words to her in hours. "Dinner is served at 8. I trust you will find everything satisfactory." With that, he turned and strode toward what she would later learn was his study, leaving her standing in the cavernous entrance hall, surrounded by strangers. Her chambers were in the east wing, connected to the Duke's apartments by a shared sitting room. The bedroom was larger than her entire bedchamber at Hartley Manor had been, decorated in shades of cream and gold, with a 4-poster bed draped in silk. It was luxurious and impersonal, like a room in an expensive hotel. "His Grace's chambers are through there," Mrs. Pemberton said, indicating a door on the far wall. "Though he rarely uses the connecting rooms, he prefers his privacy." The message was clear. This would not be a marriage of companionship or intimacy. They would live separate lives under the same roof. That first dinner was an exercise in awkwardness. They sat at opposite ends of a table designed to seat 24, served by silent footmen who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The Duke ate methodically, occasionally glancing at a newspaper beside his plate. Georgiana picked at her food. Her appetite vanished. "The estate manager will meet with you tomorrow," the Duke said suddenly, startling her. "He will explain your household responsibilities. If you require anything, inform Mrs. Pemberton." "Thank you, Your Grace. You may call me Ashford, or Everett if you prefer, when we are private." It was the closest thing to warmth he had shown her, though his tone remained formal. "Then you must call me Georgiana." He nodded once, then returned his attention to his newspaper. That night, alone in her grand new bedroom, Georgiana finally allowed herself to cry. She wept for her lost freedom, for the romantic dreams she had harbored as a girl, for the cold reality of her situation. She had imagined marriage as partnership, as companionship, perhaps even as love. Instead, she had become a duchess in name only, trapped in a gilded cage, with a husband who regarded her as little more than a necessary inconvenience. The weeks that followed established a pattern that would define their marriage. The Duke rose early and spent his days managing his vast holdings, meeting with stewards and solicitors or riding across his estates. Georgiana met with Mrs. Pemberton, learned the intricacies of managing a household of 40 servants, and tried to find purpose in her new role. They dined together most evenings, exchanging perhaps a dozen words. Afterward, he retreated to his study, while she sat alone in the drawing-room, reading or embroidering, listening to the clock tick away the empty hours. She wrote long letters to Penelope, carefully cheerful, describing the beauty of Ashford Hall and the efficiency of the household. She did not mention the loneliness that gnawed at her, or the way her husband looked through her rather than at her, or how she sometimes went entire days hearing her own voice only when giving instructions to servants. On their 1-month anniversary, the Duke did not acknowledge the date. Georgiana had not expected him to, yet the silence still stung. But there was one place where Georgiana found solace: the music room. It was a beautiful chamber on the ground floor, with tall windows overlooking the gardens and a magnificent pianoforte that had belonged to the Duke's mother. Mrs. Pemberton had mentioned in a rare moment of warmth that the late Duchess had been an accomplished musician. Georgiana had learned piano as a girl, and she was grateful to discover that her fingers still remembered. In the evenings, after the Duke had disappeared into his study, she would slip into the music room and play Beethoven, Mozart, folk songs her mother had taught her. The music filled the emptiness inside her, gave voice to emotions she could not otherwise express. She did not know that sometimes, passing in the corridor, the Duke paused outside the music room door to listen. Winter descended upon Ashford Hall with brutal efficiency, transforming the estate into a landscape of white silence. Georgiana had been the Duchess of Ashford for 3 months, and in that time she had learned to navigate her role with quiet competence. The servants had warmed to her gentle manner, the estate accounts were impeccably maintained, and she had successfully hosted 2 small dinner parties for the Duke's political associates. Yet the distance between her and her husband remained as vast as ever. It was Mrs. Pemberton who informed her of the upcoming event that would change everything. His Grace has decided to host the annual Ashford Winter Ball, the housekeeper announced one December morning. It's a tradition that was discontinued after the late Duchess passed, but he feels it's time to resume it. As the new Duchess, you will be expected to organize it. Georgiana's heart quickened with a mixture of anxiety and hope. A ball meant society, conversation, life within these silent walls. Perhaps it also meant an opportunity to prove herself to her husband, to show him she was more than just a convenient solution to his need for an heir. When is it to be held? The week before Christmas. We're expecting nearly 200 guests, including several members of the aristocracy and Parliament. It will be the social event of the season in this county. For the next 3 weeks, Georgiana threw herself into preparations with an energy born of desperation. She consulted with the cook on elaborate menus, worked with the head gardener to transform the ballroom with winter flowers and greenery, coordinated with musicians from London, and oversaw every detail from the guest list to the arrangement of guest chambers. The Duke observed her efforts with his usual detachment, offering neither praise nor criticism, simply nodding when she presented plans for his approval. What Georgiana did not know was that among the invited guests was someone from her past, someone whose memory still haunted her quiet moments. The night of the ball arrived with crystalline cold and clear skies. Ashford Hall blazed with light, every window glowing, the circular drive filled with arriving carriages. Georgiana stood beside her husband in the receiving line, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her colouring beautifully. Diamonds, the Ashford diamonds worn by duchesses for generations, glittered at her throat and ears. She looked every inch the aristocratic hostess, though her hands trembled slightly within her long gloves. The Duke, resplendent in black evening attire, performed his duties with mechanical precision, greeting each guest with the same measured courtesy. Georgiana smiled until her face ached, curtsied until her legs grew tired, and tried to ignore the speculative glances and whispered comments that followed in their wake. Such a young duchess, she heard one elderly countess murmur, and from such a modest family. One wonders what the Duke was thinking. The ballroom was magnificent, transformed into a winter wonderland of white roses, silver ribbons and candlelight that reflected off crystal chandeliers. The orchestra played beautifully, couples swirled across the polished floor, and champagne flowed freely. Georgiana had succeeded in creating a spectacular event. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt increasingly uneasy. It began when she noticed a young woman watching her with peculiar intensity from across the room. The woman was beautiful in a sharp, calculated way. Blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls, a gown of ice-blue silk that must have cost a fortune, and eyes that assessed Georgiana with barely concealed hostility. When their gazes met, the woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Who is that lady?" Georgiana asked Mrs. Pemberton, who was supervising the refreshment tables nearby. The housekeeper's expression tightened. "That is Lady Clarissa Worthington. She and His Grace were acquainted before your marriage." The way she said acquainted told Georgiana everything she needed to know. This was the woman the Duke had loved, the one the rumors spoke of, but the rumors had said she died. Clearly that was not true. Before Georgiana could process this information, Lady Clarissa was approaching, gliding across the ballroom floor with the confidence of someone who knew she commanded attention. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying with exaggerated deference. "Oh, what a charming ball. You've done remarkably well for someone so inexperienced in these matters." The insult was delicately wrapped in compliment, but it stung nonetheless. "Thank you, Lady Clarissa. I'm pleased you're enjoying yourself." "Oh, I always enjoy visiting Ashford Hall. I know it so intimately, you see. I spent a great deal of time here once." Her smile sharpened. But that was before circumstances changed. Georgiana felt her cheeks flush, but before she could respond, the Duke appeared at her elbow. His expression was unreadable as he looked at Lady Clarissa. "Lady Clarissa, I was not aware you had been invited." "I came as Lady Pembroke's guest," she replied smoothly. "Surely you don't object to my presence, Everett. We are old friends, after all." The use of his Christian name was deliberate, intimate, designed to wound. Georgiana felt it like a blade between her ribs. "If you'll excuse me," the Duke said coldly, "I have other guests to attend to." He walked away without another word, leaving Georgiana standing alone with Lady Clarissa, who watched him go with an expression of smug satisfaction. "He's still angry with me, you see," Lady Clarissa said conversationally. "I broke our engagement 5 years ago to marry Lord Worthington. He was wealthier then, and I was young and foolish. But Lord Worthington died last year, and now—" She paused, her eyes following the Duke across the room. "Now I'm free, and I've realized what a terrible mistake I made." Georgiana's blood ran cold. "I don't understand why you're telling me this." "Don't you? My dear Duchess, surely you've realized by now that your marriage is nothing but a business arrangement. Everett needed a wife to satisfy society's expectations and produce an heir. He chose you because you were convenient and desperate. Your family's debts made you compliant. But he doesn't love you. He never will. His heart belongs to me, as it always has." The words struck with devastating accuracy because they echoed Georgiana's own fears, the doubts that kept her awake at night. "You're mistaken," Georgiana said, though her voice wavered. "The Duke and I have barely spoken since your wedding. Live in separate wings of this house. Maintain the appearance of marriage while living as strangers." Lady Clarissa's laugh was cruel. "Everyone knows, Your Grace. The servants talk. Society speculates. You're a duchess in name only, a placeholder until Everett tires of this charade." Georgiana felt the room spinning around her. She wanted to flee, to hide, but she was trapped by duty and dignity, forced to stand there while this woman dismantled her life with surgical precision. "I've spoken to him, you know," Lady Clarissa continued, "earlier this evening in the library. I told him I've realized my mistake, that I want him back. And do you know what he said?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He said he would consider it, that our marriage yours and his, could be quietly dissolved, annulled perhaps, on grounds of non-consummation. Is it true, your grace? Has he never even touched you? The humiliation was complete. Georgiana felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of this woman and 200 guests. "Excuse me," she managed, her voice barely audible. "I need to attend to my duties." She turned and walked away with as much dignity as she could muster, though inside she was shattering. She moved through the ballroom in a daze, smiling mechanically, responding to comments without hearing them, all while Lady Clarissa's words echoed in her mind. He said he would consider it. Could it be true? Would the Duke truly dissolve their marriage for this woman who had abandoned him? Georgiana thought of the past 3 months, the silence, the distance, the careful avoidance of anything resembling intimacy. Perhaps Lady Clarissa was right. Perhaps she was nothing but a temporary inconvenience. The evening dragged on interminably. Georgiana watched from across the room as Lady Clarissa danced with the Duke, her hand on his arm, her head tilted toward him in intimate conversation. He did not smile, but he did not pull away either. They looked perfect together. Two beautiful people from the same world, speaking the same language of privilege and power. Georgiana had never felt more like an outsider, an impostor wearing borrowed jewels and a title she had not earned. When the last guest finally departed near dawn, Georgiana fled to her chambers. She dismissed her maid with shaking hands, desperate to be alone. Only when the door closed behind her did she allow herself to collapse onto the bed, still wearing her emerald gown and the Ashford diamonds, and weep. She cried for her foolish hope that this marriage might become something more than a contract. She cried for the loneliness that consumed her. She cried for the realization that she had developed feelings for her cold, distant husband, feelings that would never be returned. And she cried because somewhere in this vast, silent house, the Duke was perhaps contemplating a future without her, a future with the woman he had truly loved. What Georgiana did not know was that at that very moment, the Duke was passing by the music room on his way to his study. He paused, hearing something that made him stop completely, the sound of weeping, muffled but unmistakable, coming from the direction of her chambers. And then, carried on the quiet air, he heard her voice, broken and anguished. "Oh, Thomas, Thomas, why did you have to die?" The Duke stood frozen in the darkened corridor, his hand on the doorframe, as something shifted irrevocably in his chest. His wife was weeping for another man, a man named Thomas, a man she clearly loved. In that moment, Everett Blackwood realized with stunning clarity that he had been a fool. He had assumed Georgiana had married him purely for financial security, that she had no feelings beyond relief at saving her family. It had never occurred to him that she might have left behind a love of her own, that she might be suffering as he once had. For the first time since their wedding, he truly saw her, not as a convenient solution or a duchess in training, but as a woman with her own heart, her own pain, her own lost dreams. And for the first time in 5 years, the ice around his own heart began, ever so slightly, to crack. The morning after the ball, Georgiana woke with swollen eyes and a headache that pounded behind her temples. The emerald gown lay in a crumpled heap on the floor, where she had finally removed it in the early hours, and the Ashford diamonds sat abandoned on her dressing table, glittering accusingly in the pale winter light. She had cried herself into exhaustion, and now, in the cold clarity of morning, she felt hollowed out and numb. A soft knock at the door announced her maid Betty, who entered with a breakfast tray and carefully averted eyes. The servants always knew everything. "His Grace requests your presence in the morning room at 10 o'clock, Your Grace," Betty said quietly, setting down the tray. Georgiana's stomach clenched. So it was to happen already. He would tell her about Lady Clarissa, about the annulment, about the end of their brief, cold marriage. She should feel relieved. She would be free of this prison of silence and loneliness. Instead, she felt only a deep, aching sadness. She dressed carefully in a simple day dress of grey wool, appropriate for the serious conversation ahead. When she entered the morning room precisely at 10, she found the Duke standing by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. He did not turn immediately when she entered. "You wish to see me?" Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. He turned then, and she was startled by his appearance. He looked as though he had not slept, his face drawn, shadows beneath his grey eyes. For a long moment he simply studied her, and she forced herself to meet his gaze, to face whatever was coming with dignity. "I have been thinking," he began slowly, "about our arrangement." Here it was. Georgiana lifted her chin. "I understand. Do you?" Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps. "I wonder." Lady Clarissa explained the situation quite clearly last night. "You wish to dissolve our marriage. I will not contest it." Now he looked genuinely confused. "Lady Clarissa spoke to you? She informed me that you still love her, that our marriage was merely convenient, and that you are considering an annulment." The words came out more bitterly than she intended. She was quite thorough in her explanations. The Duke's jaw tightened, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw genuine anger flash across his features. "Lady Clarissa had no right to speak to you of such matters. What she suggested is absolutely false." Georgiana blinked, uncertain she had heard correctly. "False? I have no intention of dissolving our marriage. Lady Clarissa approached me last night with a ridiculous proposal that I rejected immediately. Whatever she told you was either a deliberate lie or a delusion." He paused, then added more quietly, "I apologize that you were subjected to her malice. It was unconscionable." Relief flooded through Georgiana so powerfully that she had to steady herself against a chair. He was not sending her away. But then why had he summoned her? "I asked you here," the Duke continued, "because I have a proposal of a different nature. My aunt, Lady Beatrice Ashford, has written to invite us to spend the Christmas season at her home in Bath. She is my late mother's sister and has been asking to meet you since our wedding. I think it would be beneficial for you to have companionship beyond these walls." Georgiana stared at him, trying to understand this unexpected development. "You wish us to travel to Bath together?" "I have business in London that will occupy me for several weeks. I thought you might prefer to spend that time with my aunt rather than remaining here alone." He hesitated, then added, "She is an unconventional woman, but kind. I believe you would find her company refreshing." It was the longest personal conversation they had ever had, and Georgiana found herself studying him with new eyes. There was something different in his manner this morning, a crack in the usual ice, a hint of uncertainty that made him seem almost human. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "Thank you." He nodded once, then seemed about to say something more, but instead simply turned back to the window. "We depart tomorrow. Betty will help you pack." Georgiana left the morning room in a state of confusion. The Duke's behaviour made no sense. Why would he send her to his aunt if he truly cared nothing for her welfare? And why had he looked at her this morning with something that almost resembled concern? The journey to Bath took 2 days, with the Duke accompanying her as far as London before departing for his business affairs. During those 2 days in the carriage, something shifted between them. He asked her about her childhood, about her sister Penelope, about her education. She answered cautiously at first, then with growing ease as she discovered he was actually listening, occasionally asking thoughtful follow-up questions. He even smiled once, a brief, fleeting expression, when she described Penelope's disastrous attempt to train their old sheepdog to dance. When they parted at the London coaching inn, he surprised her by taking her hand. "My aunt can be overwhelming, but she means well. If you need anything, write to me." It was the most personal thing he had ever said to her. Lady Beatrice Ashford lived in an elegant townhouse in the fashionable Royal Crescent, and she was indeed overwhelming. She swept Georgiana into an embrace the moment she arrived, a whirlwind of lavender silk and enthusiastic affection. "My dear girl, finally, Everett has been hiding you away like a miser hoarding gold. Let me look at you. Oh, you're even lovelier than he described. And so pale. Have you been ill? No matter, bath air will restore you. Come, come, we have so much to discuss." Lady Beatrice was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair, bright blue eyes, and an energy that belied her age. Her home was filled with books, art, and curiosities from her extensive travels. Within an hour of Georgiana's arrival, she had learned more about her new aunt than she had learned about her husband in 3 months of marriage. "Everett wrote that you've been managing Ashford Hall beautifully," Lady Beatrice said over tea that first afternoon. "But he also wrote that you seem melancholy. Are you unhappy, my dear?" The direct question caught Georgiana off guard. It's an adjustment. The Duke and I barely know each other. Everett has always been too much in his own head," Lady Beatrice said with a sigh. "After Clarissa broke their engagement, he closed himself off completely. Built walls so high that no one could reach him, but walls can be climbed, you know, or tunnelled under, or simply worn down with patience." "Lady Clarissa attended our ball," Georgiana said quietly. "She told me he still loves her." Lady Beatrice snorted inelegantly. "Clarissa Worthington is a vain, manipulative creature who wants what she cannot have. Everett doesn't love her. He never truly did. He loved the idea of her, the perfect match that society expected. When she left him, his pride was wounded more than his heart. But he's convinced himself otherwise, built a shrine to a love that never really existed." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp and kind. "The question is, my dear, do you love him?" Georgiana's teacup rattled in its saucer. We barely speak. How can I love someone I don't know?" "That's not an answer." And Georgiana realized with a jolt of recognition that she did love him, or at least she loved the glimpses she had seen beneath his cold exterior. The way he listened when she played piano, though he thought she didn't know. The quiet competence with which he managed his estates, caring for the welfare of hundreds of tenants. The flash of vulnerability she had seen in his eyes that morning. She loved the man he might be, if only those walls came down. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "He doesn't love me, doesn't he? Then why did he send you to me?" Lady Beatrice smiled knowingly. "Everett doesn't do anything without purpose, child. He sent you here because he wants you to be happy, even if he doesn't quite understand why that matters to him yet." Over the following weeks, Georgiana bloomed under Lady Beatrice's care like a flower finally given sunlight. Her aunt introduced her to Bath society, not the stuffy, judgmental aristocracy of London, but a more eclectic mix of artists, writers, scholars, and progressive thinkers who gathered in Lady Beatrice's drawing room for lively debates and intellectual discourse. It was at one of these gatherings that Georgiana met Dr. Edmund Thorne, a physician and natural philosopher who had recently returned from studying in Edinburgh. He was perhaps 35, with kind brown eyes, prematurely grey hair, and an enthusiasm for his work that was infectious. When he learned that Georgiana had studied botany as a girl, he engaged her in a spirited discussion about medicinal plants that lasted well into the evening. "You have a remarkable mind, Your Grace," he said as the gathering dispersed. "Have you considered pursuing your botanical studies further? There's a lecture series at the Assembly Rooms on natural sciences. I think you would find it fascinating." Georgiana felt a spark of excitement she had not experienced in months. "I would like that very much." Lady Beatrice, observing from across the room, smiled to herself. Her nephew's wife was finally coming alive. The lectures became a weekly event that Georgiana anticipated eagerly. Dr. Thorne often sat beside her, explaining complex concepts and lending her books from his extensive library. He treated her as an intellectual equal, valuing her opinions and insights. For the first time since her marriage, Georgiana felt seen, not as a duchess or a solution to a problem, but as herself. "You seem happier," Lady Beatrice observed one evening as they prepared for bed. "Bath agrees with you." "It does," Georgiana admitted. "I feel useful here, like my thoughts and interests matter." "They always mattered, dear. You simply needed people who recognized that." Lady Beatrice paused, then added carefully, "Dr. Thorne seems quite taken with you." Georgiana blushed. "He's been very kind, but he knows I'm married." "Of course. I simply observe that it's good for you to have friends, to be appreciated for your mind as well as your position." She hesitated, then asked, "Have you heard from Everett? He writes occasionally, brief letters about estate business." Georgiana tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. What she didn't know was that the Duke's letters to his aunt were far more frequent and far more revealing. In them, he asked detailed questions about Georgiana's welfare, her activities, her happiness. Lady Beatrice, reading between the lines, recognized the signs of a man beginning to realize what he stood to lose. One snowy January afternoon, as Georgiana returned from a lecture with Dr. Thorne, she found a letter waiting for her. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and when she opened it, her heart stopped. It was from Penelope, and the news was devastating. Their father had suffered an apoplexy and died suddenly. The funeral had already taken place. The letter had been delayed by winter storms. Georgiana collapsed into a chair, the letter falling from her nerveless fingers. She had not been there. She had not said goodbye. Whatever complicated feelings she had harbored toward her father, resentment for forcing the marriage, love for the man he had been before gambling consumed him, would never be resolved now. Lady Beatrice found her there an hour later, staring into space, tears streaming silently down her face. "Oh, my dear child," she murmured, gathering Georgiana into her arms. "I'm so sorry." That night, alone in her room, Georgiana wept not just for her father, but for everything, for Thomas, her childhood friend who had died of fever 2 years ago, the boy she had loved before duty demanded she marry a duke, for her lost innocence and abandoned dreams, for the loneliness of her marriage and the impossibility of her situation. And in London, the Duke received a letter from his aunt informing him of Lord Hartley's death and Georgiana's grief. He sat in his study for a long time, remembering the sound of her weeping that night after the ball, whispering Thomas's name. He had assumed Thomas was a current love, perhaps someone she had been forced to leave behind. Now he wondered if Thomas, like Clarissa, was a ghost, a memory that haunted her as Clarissa had once haunted him. For the first time, Everett Blackwood understood that he and his wife were not so different after all. They were both prisoners of the past, both hiding behind walls, both desperately lonely in their separate cages, and for the first time he wondered if perhaps they might find a way forward, together. Georgiana remained in Bath through the winter, and as February arrived, with its promise of approaching spring, something fundamental had shifted within her. Her father's death, though painful, had severed the last chain binding her to her old life of obligation and passivity. Lady Beatrice's companionship had reminded her that she possessed intelligence and worth beyond her title, and Dr. Thorne's respectful friendship had shown her what it meant to be valued for one's mind and character. She was no longer the frightened girl who had married the Duke of Ashford. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger. "You've changed," Lady Beatrice observed one morning over breakfast. "There's steel in you now that wasn't there before." "Perhaps it was always there," Georgiana replied, "but I had forgotten how to find it." "Everett is returning to London next week," her aunt said carefully. "He's written to say he'll collect you on his way back to Ashford Hall. It's time, I think, for you to return to your husband." Georgiana's heart quickened with an emotion she couldn't quite name, anxiety mixed with something else. Anticipation, perhaps. She had thought about the Duke often during her time in Bath, wondering if the small changes she had sensed in him before their parting had been real or imagined. His letters had remained brief and formal, Yet Lady Beatrice had mentioned more than once that he inquired regularly about Georgiana's welfare. "I'm ready," Georgiana said, and realized she meant it. She was ready to return not as a timid bride, but as a woman who knew her own worth. The Duke arrived in Bath on a grey March morning, and when Georgiana descended the stairs to greet him, she saw his eyes widen almost imperceptibly. She wore a travelling dress of deep burgundy that complemented her colouring beautifully, and her hair was arranged in a more sophisticated style than she had worn before. But the real change was in her bearing, the way she held her head high, the confidence in her step, the direct way she met his gaze. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying. "I hope your journey was pleasant." It was tolerable. He seemed unable to look away from her. "You look, well, Bath has agreed with you." "It has. Your aunt has been extraordinarily kind." Lady Beatrice appeared then, embracing her nephew warmly. "Everett, you look dreadful. Have you been sleeping at all?" "No, don't answer. I can see you haven't. You work too hard." She turned to Georgiana with a conspiratorial smile. "Make him rest, my dear. He's useless when he's exhausted." The journey back to Ashford Hall took 2 days, and this time the silence in the carriage was different, charged with unspoken questions and a new awareness. Georgiana caught the Duke watching her several times, his expression thoughtful, almost puzzled, as if she were a problem he couldn't quite solve. "My aunt writes that you attended lectures on natural sciences," he said finally, breaking the silence. "I did. Dr. Thorne was kind enough to introduce me to several fascinating speakers. I particularly enjoyed the discussions on botanical classification and medicinal applications of native plants." "Dr. Thorne," the Duke's tone was carefully neutral. "My aunt mentioned him frequently in her letters. He's a brilliant physician and a good friend. He treated me as an intellectual equal, which was refreshing." Something flickered in the Duke's eyes. Was it jealousy? Surely not. Yet his next words were sharp. "I'm pleased you found such stimulating companionship in Bath." Georgiana turned to face him fully. "Are you? Because for 3 months before I left, I barely heard your voice, except at dinner. You treated me as a housekeeper, not a wife, not even a friend. So yes, it was refreshing to be seen as a person with thoughts and interests worth considering." The Duke looked as though she had struck him. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said quietly, "You're right. I have been unfair to you. I apologize." It was the first genuine apology he had ever offered her, and Georgiana felt her anger soften slightly. "Why did you marry me, Everett? And please don't say it was merely for an heir. I deserve more honesty than that." He was silent for a long moment, staring out at the passing countryside. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and raw. "Because I was a coward. After Clarissa left me, I convinced myself that love was a weakness, that emotion was dangerous. I wanted a marriage of convenience because I thought it would be safe, no risk of being hurt again. I chose you because you seemed gentle and biddable, someone who wouldn't demand more than I was willing to give." He turned to look at her then, and she saw genuine regret in his eyes. "I didn't consider what you might need or want. I didn't think of you as a person with your own heart, your own dreams. That was unconscionable, and I am deeply sorry." Georgiana felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you for your honesty." "I heard you," he said suddenly, "the night of the ball. I heard you weeping, saying Thomas's name. I realized then that you had sacrificed as much as I had, perhaps more, that you had left behind someone you loved to save your family. I had been so consumed with my own past that I never considered yours." So he had heard. Georgiana took a shaky breath. "Thomas was my childhood friend. We grew up together, and yes, I loved him. We had an understanding, though nothing formal, but he died of fever 2 years ago, before we could marry. When my father's debts became insurmountable, I had no choice but to accept your proposal. I mourned Thomas, but I also tried to make peace with my new life. I tried to be a good duchess, a good wife. But you gave me nothing to work with, no kindness, no conversation, no acknowledgement that I existed beyond my duties. I know. His voice was rough with emotion, and I have no excuse except my own cowardice and selfishness. But I want to change that, Georgiana. If you'll allow it, I want to try to build something real between us. Not the cold arrangement we've had, but a true partnership. Georgiana studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his face. She saw it there. Vulnerability, hope, and something else she was afraid to name. That will require effort from both of us. It will require you to let down the walls you've built and actually let me know you. I understand, and I'm willing to try if you are. She nodded slowly. Then we'll try. But Everett, I won't be treated as a convenience again. I won't be ignored or dismissed. I deserve respect and consideration, and I will demand it. A small smile touched his lips, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. I would expect nothing less. You've changed, Georgiana. You're stronger now. Bath taught me to value myself again. Your aunt taught me that I don't have to accept less than I deserve. Then I'm grateful to her, even if it means you'll be far more difficult to ignore. Was he teasing her? Georgiana felt an answering smile tug at her own lips. I intend to be impossible to ignore. They arrived at Ashford Hall as dusk was falling, and Georgiana felt a strange sense of homecoming as the familiar facade came into view. The staff assembled to welcome them back, and she noticed Mrs. Pemberton's approving nod as she greeted them. That evening, for the first time, the Duke suggested they take tea together in the drawing room rather than dining formally. They sat by the fire, and he asked her about Bath. Really asked, listening as she described the lectures, the conversations, the books she had read. She found herself relaxing, even laughing, as she recounted some of Lady Beatrice's more outrageous opinions on society's conventions. She told Lady Pembroke that corsets were instruments of patriarchal oppression and that women should burn them all, Georgiana said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Poor Lady Pembroke nearly fainted. The Duke laughed, a genuine warm sound that transformed his entire face. That sounds exactly like Aunt Beatrice. She's been scandalizing society for 40 years. It was the most pleasant evening Georgiana had spent since her wedding, and when they finally parted for the night, the Duke took her hand and raised it to his lips, a gesture of courtship rather than mere formality. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving me another chance." Over the following weeks, the Duke made good on his promise. He began taking breakfast with Georgiana, discussing estate matters and asking her opinions. He invited her to ride with him across the grounds, showing her the tenant farms and introducing her properly to the families who lived there. He even joined her in the music room one evening, revealing that he played violin, and they spent an hour making music together, tentative at first, then with growing harmony. Georgiana felt hope blooming in her chest, fragile but real. Perhaps their marriage could become something more than a contract after all. But then Lady Clarissa returned. She arrived unannounced one April afternoon, sweeping into Ashford Hall as if she still had every right to be there. Georgiana was in the morning room reviewing menus with Mrs. Pemberton when Hastings announced the visitor. "Lady Clarissa Worthington is here to see His Grace, your Grace. She insists it's urgent." Georgiana's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "Show her to the drawing room. I'll inform the Duke." She found Everett in his study, and when she told him about their visitor, his expression darkened. "I'll handle this. You needn't be present." "No," Georgiana said firmly. "I'm your wife. I'll be there." Something like pride flashed in his eyes. "Very well. Together, then." They entered the drawing room side by side, and Georgiana had the satisfaction of seeing surprise flicker across Lady Clarissa's beautiful face. The widow was dressed in lavender, half-mourning, and she had clearly expected to find the Duke alone. "Everett," she began, then caught herself. "Your Grace, and your Grace." The latter was added with barely concealed disdain. "How domestic. What do you want, Clarissa?" The Duke's voice was cold. I came to apologize for my behavior at your ball. I was inappropriate, and I spoke out of turn to your wife. I hope you can forgive me." The words were pretty, but her eyes were calculating. "Your apology is noted," Everett said. "Was there anything else?" Lady Clarissa's mask slipped slightly. "I had hoped we might speak privately about old times. Anything you wish to say can be said in front of my wife." "Very well." Lady Clarissa's voice hardened. "I made a mistake, Everett. I should never have left you. I've realized that you're the only man I've ever truly loved. I'm asking you to give me another chance. Your marriage can be dissolved. It's been less than a year, and I'm certain arrangements could be made. We could finally have the life we were meant to have together." The audacity of it left Georgiana breathless. But before she could speak, Everett stepped forward, his voice like ice. "You're correct that you made a mistake, Clarissa, but it wasn't leaving me. It was coming here today. I don't love you. I never truly did. What I felt for you was the infatuation of a young man who didn't know better. You did me a favor by showing me your true character before we married." He moved to stand beside Georgiana, and she felt his hand find hers, their fingers intertwining. "I have a wife, a remarkable woman, whom I'm only beginning to truly know and appreciate. I have no intention of dissolving our marriage. In fact, I intend to spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of her." Georgiana's heart soared as she looked up at him and saw the sincerity in his eyes. He meant it, every word. Lady Clarissa's face contorted with fury. "You'll regret this, Everett. She's nothing, a nobody from a bankrupt family who trapped you into marriage. She'll never be what I could have been to you." "You're wrong," Georgiana said, finding her voice at last. "I may have come from a modest family, but I have something you'll never possess: integrity, compassion, and the capacity to love someone beyond myself. The Duke deserves better than you could ever offer him. Now, I believe it's time for you to leave." For a moment, Lady Clarissa simply stared at her, then at Everett, who nodded in agreement. Without another word, she turned and swept from the room, her exit far less graceful than her entrance. When the door closed behind her, Georgiana released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Everett turned to her, still holding her hand. "I meant what I said," he told her quietly. "Every word. I want to build a real marriage with you, Georgiana, if you'll have me." She looked up at this man who had been a stranger, then a cold husband, and was now becoming something more, a partner, perhaps even a friend. And she realized that somewhere along the way, her feelings for him had deepened into something real and precious. "I'll have you," she whispered. "But Everett, no more walls, no more distance. If we do this, we do it honestly." "No more walls," he agreed. And then, for the first time, he kissed her, not the perfunctory brush of lips at their wedding, but a real kiss, tender and full of promise. Outside, spring was blooming across the Ashford estates, and inside, something equally precious was finally beginning to grow. The weeks following Lady Clarissa's departure brought a transformation to Ashford Hall that the servants whispered about in the kitchens and hallways. The Duke and Duchess were seen walking together in the gardens, their heads bent in conversation. They took breakfast together every morning, and laughter, actual laughter, could be heard coming from the drawing room in the evenings. The cold, silent house was warming, coming alive in ways it hadn't since the late Duchess's time. Georgiana found herself falling in love with her husband, not the distant, icy man she had married, but the person he was revealing himself to be beneath the protective armor. Everett was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry wit that surprised her into laughter. He was deeply committed to the welfare of his tenants, spending hours ensuring their farms were productive and their families cared for. And he was, she discovered, capable of great tenderness when he allowed himself to be vulnerable. One evening in late April, as they sat together in the music room, she at the pianoforte, he with his violin, he paused in the middle of a Mozart sonata and set down his instrument. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. "About Clarissa, about why I became the way I was." Georgiana's hands stilled on the keys. "You don't have to." "I do. If we're to have honesty between us, you deserve to know." He sat beside her on the piano bench, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "When Clarissa broke our engagement, I was 25 and foolish enough to believe my heart was shattered beyond repair. But the truth is, my pride was wounded more than anything else. I had been rejected, made to look the fool before all of society, so I built walls, convinced myself that emotion was weakness, that caring for someone gave them power to hurt you. And now?" Georgiana asked softly. "Now I realize that those walls didn't protect me, they imprisoned me. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I hurt you instead, and myself in the process. I wasted months of our marriage hiding behind duty and distance, when I could have been getting to know the remarkable woman I had married." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I heard you that night after the ball, weeping for Thomas, and I realized that you understood loss in a way I had pretended to. You had loved and lost, yet you still had the courage to try again, to be kind, to remain open, while I had closed myself off completely." Tears pricked Georgiana's eyes. "Thomas was my dearest friend. I loved him, yes, but it was the love of childhood, of familiarity. What I feel for you—" She paused, gathering courage. "What I feel for you is different, deeper. You're not a replacement for what I lost. You're something entirely new, something I choose freely, not out of obligation or memory, but because of who you are." Everett's eyes darkened with emotion. "Georgiana, He seemed to struggle with the words, then finally said, "I'm falling in love with you. Perhaps I have been since that night I heard you weeping, when I realized you were a person with your own heart, your own pain, but certainly since you returned from Bath, so strong and sure of yourself. You've become essential to me in ways I never anticipated." "I love you too," she whispered, and saying the words aloud felt like breaking free of chains she hadn't known she wore. "I think I've loved you for longer than I realized. Even when I was angry with you, even when I felt most alone, there was always this hope that you might see me, truly see me. And now you do." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and when they finally drew apart, both were breathless. "Come with me," he said, standing and offering his hand. "There's something I want to show you." He led her through the house to his private study, a room she had never entered before. It was lined with books and papers, maps of the estates covering one wall, but he brought her to his desk, where a leather portfolio lay open. "I've been working on something," he said, suddenly seeming almost nervous. "A project I'd like your input on." Georgiana looked down at the papers and saw detailed plans for a school, architectural drawings, budgets, curriculum proposals. "What is this?" "A school for the tenant children. And not just basic literacy, but real education, mathematics, sciences, literature. I've been thinking about what you said, about Dr. Thorne treating you as an intellectual equal, about how rare that is for women. I want to create opportunities for all the children on our estates, regardless of their station or sex." He looked at her earnestly. "But I need your help. You have insights I lack, and I trust your judgment. Will you work on this with me, as a true partner?" Georgiana felt her heart swell with love and pride. This was what she had longed for, to be valued not just as a duchess or a wife, but as a thinking, capable person whose contributions mattered. Yes, absolutely yes. They spent the next hour poring over the plans together, Georgiana offering suggestions about curriculum and teaching methods, Everett taking notes and asking questions. It was a glimpse of what their marriage could be, a true partnership of minds and hearts. News of their growing closeness spread through society with the speed of wildfire. When they attended a ball in London in early May, the change in their relationship was obvious to everyone. They danced together multiple times, scandalous for a married couple, but they didn't care. They stood close, spoke quietly to each other, and the Duke's hand rarely left the small of his wife's back. Lady Pembroke, who had been at the disastrous Ashford winter ball, remarked loudly to her companions, "Well, I never would have predicted this. The Duke looks positively besotted, and the Duchess has certainly come into her own, quite different from the timid girl at their wedding. But not everyone was pleased by their happiness. Lady Clarissa, present at the ball with her current suitor, watched them with barely concealed fury. When Georgiana excused herself to the ladies' retiring room, Clarissa followed. "Enjoying your victory," Clarissa said coldly as Georgiana adjusted her hair in the mirror. Georgiana met her eyes in the reflection. "This isn't a competition, Lady Clarissa. It's a marriage. He'll tire of you eventually. Men always do. And when he does, when he remembers what he could have had with me—" "He won't," Georgiana interrupted, turning to face her directly. "Because what we have is real. It's built on respect and honesty and genuine affection. What you offered him was vanity and manipulation. You had your chance with him years ago, and you chose wealth over love. That was your decision, and you must live with it. But you will not poison my marriage with your bitterness." For once, Lady Clarissa had no response. Georgiana swept past her and returned to the ballroom, where Everett was waiting, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Is everything all right?" he asked, noting her flushed cheeks. "Everything is perfect," she assured him, and meant it. The following week they received an invitation that surprised them both. A letter from Dr. Edmund Thorne, inviting them to attend a medical symposium in Oxford, where he would be presenting his research. The invitation was addressed to both of them, and included a personal note to Georgiana thanking her for her insights on botanical medicine, which had contributed to his work. Everett read the invitation with an expression Georgiana couldn't quite decipher. "You made quite an impression on Dr. Thorne during your time in Bath." "He's a brilliant man and a good friend," Georgiana said carefully. "His work on medicinal applications of native plants could help countless people. Did you—" Everett hesitated, then continued. "Did you have feelings for him?" Georgiana understood then. He was jealous, uncertain, vulnerable in a way he had never allowed himself to be before. She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "Edmund Thorne was kind to me when I desperately needed kindness. He reminded me that I had value beyond my title. For that, I'll always be grateful to him. But I never had romantic feelings for him, Everett. My heart was already engaged. Even if I didn't fully realize it at the time, it was engaged with you." The relief in his eyes was palpable. "Then we'll attend the symposium together. I'd like to meet this man who helped my wife find herself again." They travelled to Oxford in June, and the symposium proved fascinating. Dr. Thorne greeted them warmly, shaking Everett's hand with genuine friendliness and no trace of awkwardness. "Your Grace, I'm honoured to finally meet you. Your wife spoke of you often during her time in Bath." "Did she?" Everett glanced at Georgiana with surprise. "Indeed. She worried about you, about whether you were resting enough, eating properly. It was clear even then that she cared deeply for you, though I don't think she fully recognized it herself." Dr. Thorne smiled. "I'm glad to see you both looking so happy. It's rare to see a marriage of genuine partnership and affection among the aristocracy." Later, as they walked through Oxford's ancient streets, Everett took Georgiana's hand. "You spoke of me to Dr. Thorne." "Of course I did. You were my husband, even when we barely knew each other. I wanted our marriage to work, Everett. I just didn't know how to bridge the distance between us. And now there is no distance. Now we're building something real together." They returned to Ashford Hall in late June to find the estate in full summer glory, roses blooming in the gardens, fields golden with wheat, the air warm and sweet. And they returned to find a letter waiting from Penelope, Georgiana's sister, asking if she might visit for a few weeks. "Of course she must come," Everett said immediately. "She's your family, and this is your home. Invite her to stay as long as she likes." Penelope arrived a week later, and Georgiana was shocked by how much her younger sister had matured in the months since their father's death. At 19, Penelope had taken on the responsibility of managing what remained of the Hartley estate with remarkable competence. "Georgie, you look so happy," Penelope said as they walked through the gardens together. "When I last saw you at your wedding, you looked like you were going to your execution, but now you're radiant." "I'm happy," Georgiana admitted. "It took time and it wasn't easy, but Everett and I have found our way to each other. We're building a real marriage, Penny, the kind I always dreamed of. I'm so glad. You deserve happiness after everything you sacrificed for us." That evening at dinner, Everett announced his plans for the school, crediting Georgiana's contributions. "Your sister has been instrumental in developing the curriculum. She has a gift for education that I lack." Penelope beamed with pride. "That's wonderful. Georgie was always the cleverest of us. Father never appreciated her mind the way he should have." As summer deepened, Georgiana realized that she had finally found what she had been seeking all along, not just love, but partnership, respect, and purpose. She was no longer the frightened girl who had married for duty, nor was Everett the cold man who had wed for convenience. They had both transformed, grown, learned to let down their walls and trust each other. One warm July evening, as they sat together in the music room watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, Everett pulled her close. "I have something to tell you," he said softly. "I've been waiting for the right moment." Georgiana's heart quickened. "What is it?" "I've spoken with my solicitors. I'm having the marriage contract destroyed and replaced with a new document, one that gives you equal control over the estates, equal say in all decisions. I don't want you to be my dependent, Georgiana. I want you to be my true partner in every sense." Tears filled her eyes. "Everett, that's extraordinary. Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything. You've proven yourself more than capable, more than worthy. This should have been our arrangement from the beginning." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "I love you, Georgiana, not because you're convenient or dutiful, but because you're brilliant and strong and kind, because you challenge me to be better, because you saw past my walls and refused to give up on me." "I love you too," she whispered, "more than I ever thought possible." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in perfect contentment, two people who had found their way from a cold contract to genuine love, from isolation to partnership, from duty to choice. Their marriage had begun as a transaction, but it had become something far more precious, a true union of hearts and minds, freely chosen and deeply cherished. Autumn arrived at Ashford Hall with a painter's palette of gold and crimson, and with it came the first anniversary of Georgiana and Everett's wedding. The contrast between that cold, silent ceremony a year ago and the life they had built together now was so profound that Georgiana sometimes had to remind herself they were the same two people. The school project had come to fruition in September, with a beautiful stone building erected on the edge of the estate, equipped with books, slates, and everything necessary for a proper education. On opening day, 32 children from tenant families arrived, their faces scrubbed and eager, and Georgiana felt tears of joy as she watched them file into the classrooms. Everett stood beside her, his hand warm in hers, and she knew he felt the same pride. "We did this together," he murmured. "This is just the beginning, Georgiana. Think of what else we can accomplish." The school became Georgiana's passion project. She visited 3 times a week, sometimes teaching lessons herself, other times simply observing and making notes on how to improve the curriculum. The children adored her, and she found profound satisfaction in watching young minds, especially the girls, light up with the joy of learning. One October afternoon, as she was leaving the school, she encountered a young girl lingering by the gate. The child was perhaps 10 years old, with intelligent dark eyes and ink-stained fingers. "Your Grace," the girl said shyly, curtsying. "I wanted to thank you. My father says girls don't need education, that I should be learning to keep house. But Miss Winters says I have a gift for mathematics, and that I could become a teacher myself one day if I work hard. Is that true? Can someone like me really become a teacher?" Georgiana knelt down to the girl's level, taking her small hands. "What's your name?" Sarah, Your Grace, Sarah Cooper. Well, Sarah Cooper, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You can become anything you set your mind to, a teacher, a scholar, even a physician, if that's your dream. Don't let anyone tell you that your mind is less valuable because you're a girl. I was told that once, and I believed it for too long. But it's not true. Your intelligence is a gift, and you have every right to develop it. The girl's eyes shone with hope and determination. I'll work hard, Your Grace. I promise I'll make you proud. As Georgiana rode back to Ashford Hall in the carriage, she felt a profound sense of purpose. This was what her life was meant to be, not just managing a grand house or hosting balls, but making a real difference in people's lives, opening doors that had been closed, creating opportunities where none had existed before. Everett was waiting for her in the drawing room, and the moment she entered, she knew something significant had happened. He was smiling, that full, genuine smile that still had the power to make her heart skip. "What is it?" she asked, removing her gloves. "I have news. The House of Lords has approved my proposal for education reform. Other estates are already inquiring about replicating our school model. Georgiana, what we've started here could spread across England. We could change the future for thousands of children." She flew into his arms, laughing with delight. "That's wonderful! Oh, Everett, think of what this means." He held her close, his face buried in her hair. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You've changed everything, Georgiana. Not just the estate or the school, but me. You've made me into a better man than I ever thought I could be." "We've changed each other," she corrected softly. "That's what love does. It transforms us." Their anniversary celebration was intimate and perfect, just the two of them, a quiet dinner in the small dining room rather than the formal hall, followed by music in the drawing room. Everett had commissioned a portrait of Georgiana as an anniversary gift, and when he unveiled it, she gasped. The artist had captured her not in formal ducal regalia, but as she truly was, sitting at the pianoforte, her face animated with joy, sunlight streaming through the windows. It was a portrait of happiness, of a woman who had found her place in the world. "It's how I see you," Everett said quietly, "not as a duchess performing a role, but as yourself, brilliant, passionate, alive. I wanted to capture that. It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." Her gift to him was a leather-bound journal containing a year's worth of entries, her private thoughts and observations from their first year of marriage. She had debated whether to give it to him, whether it was too revealing, but ultimately decided that their relationship was built on honesty. He read it that evening while she played piano, and she watched his expressions shift. Pain when he read about her early loneliness and despair, wonder when he reached the entries about falling in love with him, joy at her descriptions of their growing partnership. When he finished, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry," he said hoarsely, "for those first months, for the pain I caused you. If I could go back—" "We can't go back," Georgiana interrupted gently, coming to sit beside him, "and I'm not sure I would want to. Those difficult months taught us both important lessons. They made us appreciate what we have now. We've earned this happiness, Everett. We've worked for it." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were infinitely precious. "I love you more than I have words to express. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." Winter brought unexpected news. Penelope had become engaged to a respectable gentleman from a neighbouring county, a man of modest means but good character who clearly adored her. She wrote to Georgiana with barely contained excitement, and Georgiana immediately invited them both to Ashford Hall to celebrate. "Your sister deserves happiness," Everett said when Georgiana shared the news, "and she'll have it because she's choosing freely out of love rather than necessity. Unlike—" He trailed off, but Georgiana understood. "Unlike me," she finished. "But Everett, I may have married you out of necessity, but I stay with you out of love. I choose you every day, freely and gladly. That's what matters." The engagement celebration was joyous, and watching Penelope's happiness reminded Georgiana of how far she had come. A year ago, she had been the desperate bride. Now she was the confident duchess, secure in her marriage and her purpose, able to celebrate her sister's joy without bitterness or regret. One snowy December evening, as they prepared for bed, Georgiana felt a wave of nausea that sent her rushing to the wash basin. Everett was beside her immediately, holding her hair back, his face creased with concern. "Should I send for the physician?" "No, I think I know what this is." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with wonder and a touch of fear. "Everett, I think I'm with child." His expression transformed, shock, then joy so profound it took her breath away. "Truly? You're certain?" "Not entirely, but the signs are there. We should wait a few more weeks to be sure, but—" She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "I think we're going to have a baby." He gathered her into his arms with infinite gentleness, as if she had suddenly become made of glass. "A baby. Our child." His voice was thick with emotion. "Georgiana, I never let myself hope that I could have this, a real family built on love. We're going to be parents," she said, laughing through happy tears. "Can you imagine? Us, with a child to raise and love and teach. If it's a girl, I hope she has your intelligence and strength. If it's a boy, I hope he has your kindness and courage." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "Either way, our child will be loved beyond measure." And the physician confirmed the pregnancy in January, and the news spread through the estate like wildfire. The servants were delighted, the tenants celebrated, and congratulatory letters poured in from across England. Lady Beatrice wrote with characteristic enthusiasm, promising to descend upon them the moment the baby arrived to ensure you're doing everything properly, because first-time parents are always hopeless. But the most touching response came from an unexpected source, a letter from Dr. Edmund Thorne, congratulating them and offering his services should they need medical advice during the pregnancy. He also included a note specifically for Georgiana. "I'm so pleased to see you thriving, Your Grace. When we met in Bath, I saw a woman struggling to find her place in the world. Now I see a woman who has not only found her place but has created it, building schools, changing lives, and clearly deeply loved by her husband. You've bloomed exactly where you were planted, and the world is better for it." Georgiana showed the letter to Everett, who read it thoughtfully. "He's right, you know. You have bloomed, but not just where you were planted. You've transformed the soil itself, made it richer and more fertile. Everything you touch becomes better." Indeed, as winter gave way to spring, Georgiana's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She continued her work with the school as long as she was able, finally stepping back only in her 7th month when the physician insisted. Everett was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried about her comfort and health. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain," she teased one afternoon when he insisted she rest rather than walk in the gardens. "I know, but I can't help worrying. You're carrying the most precious thing in the world, our child, and you." He placed his hand gently on her rounded belly, his expression softening when he felt the baby kick. "I never want to take for granted how fortunate I am." One warm May evening, as they sat together in the music room, a place that had witnessed so much of their journey, Georgiana reflected on the extraordinary transformation of the past year and a half. "Do you remember," she said softly, "that night after the winter ball when I was crying in my room?" Everett's expression grew somber. "I remember. I heard you say Thomas's name and I realized how little I knew about you, how much you had sacrificed. I was crying for Thomas, yes, but also for myself, for the girl I had been, for the dreams I thought I had lost. I felt so alone, so trapped." She took his hand, placing it over her heart. "But I'm not that girl anymore. I'm not alone or trapped. I'm exactly where I want to be, with exactly who I want to be with. You gave me that, Everett. You gave me the freedom to become myself." We gave each other that freedom, he corrected. You taught me that love isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength we possess. You taught me that opening your heart, even when it's terrifying, is the only way to truly live. As the sun set over the Ashford estates, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they sat together in perfect contentment. Two people who had begun as strangers bound by contract, who had struggled through loneliness and misunderstanding, who had finally found their way to genuine love and partnership. Their marriage had been cold-hearted once, a transaction devoid of feeling, but they had transformed it into something beautiful and real, something worth celebrating. They had learned that love isn't just something that happens to you. It's something you choose every day through patience and honesty and the courage to be vulnerable. And as their child grew within Georgiana, a new life created from their love, they looked forward to the future with hope and joy, knowing that whatever challenges came, they would face them together, as true partners, as best friends, as two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. The Duke had heard his wife weeping for another man, and in that moment of pain, he had finally begun to truly see her, and in seeing her, he had learned to love her, and in loving her, he had found himself. Their story was not one of love at first sight, but something perhaps more precious, love earned through struggle, built on respect, and strengthened by choice. It was a love that would endure, that would grow deeper with each passing year, that would be the foundation for the family they were creating and the legacy they would leave behind. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the velvet sky, Everett pulled Georgiana close, his hand resting protectively on her belly where their child slept. "I love you," he whispered, "today, tomorrow, and for all the days of my life." "And I love you," she replied, her voice full of certainty and peace, "always and forever." In the music room of Ashford Hall, where Georgiana had once played piano alone to fill the emptiness, two hearts now beat in perfect harmony, a symphony of love, hard-won and deeply cherished, that would echo through generations to come. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you soon.